Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations, joins me. We turn to war fighting immediately. The President of the United States in the State of the Union message, his foreign policy included mention, he pointed to the success, he directed the audience's attention to the developments of policy against the Islamic State in the Iraq and Syrian civil war. There are mentions in the president's speech that look positive. There are missing pieces. So we're hoping Andrew Tabler of the Washington Institute, he's a senior fellow in the program on Arab politics, could help us speak to the missing pieces. Andrew, a very good evening to you. From the president's remarks at State of the Union and other remarks by the Obama administration these last days, the policy of the United States in the Syrian civil war against ISIS. Are we containing ISIS? Are we defeating and degrading ISIS? Those were the verbs that the president used September 10th of last year. Or are we ignoring the whole story and moving on? Good evening to you.
Good evening. We're only containing ISIS as pertains to Syria, perhaps even Iraq too. It depends how that campaign goes. The bombing campaigns carried out by the United States and the coalition, together with working with local partners on the ground, will degrade ISIS, but to destroy it or to defeat it, as the president's outlined, cannot be achieved with the resources being put forward, and particularly in the Syria case.
Do you see us now sidestepping the question of Assad's future, without not being willing to assert anymore the desire to remove him, that would be an essential requirement of any outcome, and instead focusing solely on defeating ISIS now?
I think that the priority is defeating ISIS, but the problem that remains for the United States is that at the end of this, Assad has to go as part of the transition. In order to put the pieces of the country back together again. And if you don't do that, then you're going to have this divided country with ISIS present. It's a very difficult problem, and one that's not going to be addressed with this policy, and probably not one that's going to be fully addressed during this administration.
But we did not hear mention of some of the key issues during the State of the Union. How do you interpret the absence on the very day that the Houthis had moved against the government forces, and the Iranian general that was caught and killed in a fight with a Hezbollah group in the Sinai? We've heard no references to that, but only that those who oppose Iran's or support the additional sanctions in Iran are those who want to go to war.
Yeah, the president did not spend as much time on foreign policy. It was largely directed towards domestic affairs, and I think it's what he would like to do. Unfortunately, there are a number of festering problems that the president's not addressing, and a lot of them come out of, particularly the case of Syria, but not only. The neglect of the Syrian conflict gave birth, to ISIS, and I'm afraid that the president is now in a difficult situation because, very much like Jimmy Carter, he has great domestic expectations, has an agenda, but the foreign policy question marks are gathering, and I'm afraid that ISIS is here to stay unless he changes course.
Moscow is an outspoken supporter of the Assad regime, and Tehran as well. That's the overriding hegemon, however, of the Assad regime. So, from Moscow's point of view, or from Damascus's point of view, how do you believe they heard the president not speaking of Mr. Assad when he gave the State of the Union message and talked about ISIS?
Well, I think in listening to that speech, you can see that President Obama doesn't mention Assad, doesn't mention the continued chemical weapons attacks, and the UN has documented these using chlorine. The atrocities that almost led the United States to strike Syria. Does not mention those things. Instead, leaves it much more with fighting ISIS and working with the moderate opposition. And that then signals that perhaps Assad can stay at least for a while. But I think they still know that because of developments in the country, because of the divisions in the country, that the United States can't go back to working with Assad, that as part of a solution, he has to go at the end. I think they're hoping that the Russians and the other parties can pull a rabbit out of their hat and bring about some sort of settlement, but it doesn't look good.
So what we're listening to with the president is magical thinking. Is that what you just told us?
Is it magical thinking? I think, unfortunately, every president has a blind spot, and Syria is his blind spot.
But are we allowing Iraq then to supersede in terms of the priorities here, and the president wanting to be able to declare victory on ISIS, which would be very good, and at the same time we see that our efforts, the minimal efforts that we've made now with the opposition, according to the CIA report today, that effort has failed or not working, with whole units defecting to ISIS.
Right. Well, we have an Iraq-centered strategy, mostly because we have assets in Iraq and we have people there we can work with, and we have worked with in the past. The reason why the arming of the rebels, the covert program, which has been going on for a couple of years, didn't work, is the U.S. Was unwilling to provide more weapons to the rebels. That's one reason. The other reason is the rebels are really divided. But overall, it was U.S. decision-making, particularly on walking back from the red line there, that just politically killed the moderates. And, everyone likes a winner, including in Syria. And unfortunately, they went over to the jihadists and to the Islamists because they wanted to defeat Assad and they wanted to win the war.
The reporting says that the U.S. military is deploying trainers into Jordan to train the moderates. Is there a model you can give us that you have for what the plan is? What would this look like? Would it be, I mentioned, because it's laden, would it be Vietnam? Would it be Libya? Is there a plan like that?
There have only been a couple of instances in which the United States trained and equipped troops, in an overt program publicly, while not having the permission of the, quote, legal government, in this case the Assad regime, which is still in Damascus. And that was in Kurdistan during the 90s, and with the Free French during the Second World War. So we are in that kind of situation, and it's very tricky. And these trainers will go into Jordan, they'll train troops at a base, and then those troops will re-enter Syria, and it's at that point that we're going to run into a conundrum, because President Assad, in an interview with Foreign Affairs a couple of days ago, said that if those troops enter Syria, they should be attacked, and that he will attack those troops. And the question is, are we going to put U.S.-trained troops into Syria for a Bay of Pigs?
Is the ultimate outcome of what you're saying then, and in view of John's question also, that we're going to accept some sort of partition of Syria as an ultimate outcome with fiefdoms that will somehow be unified? Yeah,
I think for the foreseeable future, yes. At the end, it's hard to say. This is not in the legal sense, by the way. I think there's a lot of, the international system fights against the partition of countries unless independent areas break away. I think we're going to see a de facto division in the country, and I think we need to look at it as a divided country, especially now, in order to put the pieces of the country back together again at the end of the process.
Andrew Tabler, Senior Fellow Program on Arab Politics at the Washington Institute, Malcolm Hoenlein, Conference of Presidents, Major American Jewish Organizations. I'm John Batchelor.